There is no taxation without representation, and the exploitation of poor farmers by the merchants must stop.
He did a lot for his country, but very few people know very little about him.
He was called the father of Gambian nationalism.
This man was Edward Francis Small.
It is true that every man that sits in the shade today does so because someone planted a tree a long time ago. If so, have we ever wondered whose labor, whose sweat and pain has earned us the independence that we so expediently enjoy today? Many Africans today have been blighted by European ethnocentrism that has left great names uncelebrated and glory given to those who least deserve it. The Gambia is no exception to this unfortunate experience. One such uncelebrated hero is Edward Francis Small, best known in his day as the watchdog of the Gambia, a title bestowed on him for his devotion to ensuring that the cause of justice prevails. Edward Francis Small was born on January 29, 1891, to John W. Small, a tailor in Bathurst, and his mother, Annie Eliza Thomas, an immigrant woman from Sierra Leone.
My relationship to the late Edward Francis Small came through my grandfather, Moses Silvanus Olfin. Moses Olfin is the younger brother to Edward Francis Small. They're of the same mother. So Edward was the elder brother to Moses. Then Francis had his own other outside sisters, which they are of the same father, which is late Lady Anna Mahoney. That was the wife of first President of the Republic, Sir Dawda's wife's mother. Cecilia Davis, she was Small and then got married to Davis. And then you have Marshall Small. All those are on the other side of Edward Francis Small.
His birth coincided with a period when the colonial boundaries commission was wreaking havoc on communities through several human rights violations, such as the destruction of the social life in general and human lives in particular.
When Small was born, the partitioning of Africa was complete and total. From 1884 and 1885 in Germany, over the overlordship of the German Chancellor Lord Bismarck, the European countries got together and decided on who was going to have which piece of Africa. This is the backdrop with which Francis Small was born.
Small was only 5 when the cholera epidemic struck the South District of Bathurst, in which almost half the population perished. However, the little boy survived those difficult times and from a tender age showed qualities of responsibility and greatness. These eventually made him into a man who during his lifetime intrigued many in the Bathurst society of his day.
Small grew up questioning the separation of peoples by boundaries, the disruption of social equilibrium in these communities through which the borders drove, and Small decided that he would make it his concern to bring to the notice of Europeans the repercussions of their political and social action in African society. I guess that's what triggered his political consciousness.
Small's parents knew immediately that only education would make their son any better than they were. Annie Eliza Thomas saved her income from petty trading and decided with John that Edward was going to take advantage of the opportunity to get a sound education.
Around 16 years, he left the Gambia on a scholarship to Freetown, where he went to the Wesleyan School. Now, at the end of his studies, he worked at the post office in Freetown, and incidentally, this was around the time that the Freetonians were protesting against the hot tax. Now, Small came back to the Gambia, had a brief stint at the Public Works Department, then later on worked at Morel and Prom.
At a time when there were only few educated Gambians, most of whom did not wish to challenge the authority of the colonial government, Small took it upon himself as a moral obligation and sacred duty to ensure that the educated should share knowledge with those that looked up to them. Thus, as an educated Gambian in his day, Small refused to live by the culture of silence, especially when he felt that silence was a lie.
He loved his country, he loved his people. For him, he was ready to die. And we see how he contested with the Europeans to ensure that truth prevailed. So he was a nationalist in the sense that he promoted the Gambia. For him, Gambia was first. One of the ploy of the colonialists then was to make sure that the educated elite did not have anything to do with the administration of the country. They relegated them to the back. And this he refused to accept. And this is, that fighting spirit, that desire and that determination to make sure that he is heard. I think this is one thing that the youths can emulate from him.
As an educationist, Edward Francis Small was quick to observe and realize that our greatest strength and national asset is to have a citizenry with a free-thinking mind. As a result of such early realizations, Small worked out ways to sensitize his countrymen. Most of his teachings centered on nationhood and to arm the common man with information with which to bargain for his livelihood. This move resulted in the next great irony. Whereas in Small's opinion, sharing information with the lowly people was to heal them from ignorance, the colonial government and its loyal sidekicks perceived it as poisoning the minds of the peasants. To them, Small was imparting to the farmers information that would jeopardize their business and profit, and for this, Small became a declared enemy.
The areas which were directly controlled by the British colonialists used to produce mainly granules and other products, of course, which were exported, and revenue was derived, and the populace was not benefiting from this revenue. That was the reality in which the colony was. In this sense, we had Bathurst, the Ceded Mile, and Congo St. Mary. And the rest was known as the Protectorate. And Edward Francis Small, who started as a probationary clerk, was quite concerned. And he felt, or he was motivated by the slogan, "There should be no taxation without representation."
This enmity became so intense that his activities were strictly monitored. Government secret agents were at work against him, even on his missions abroad. Small was wise to decide to escape from the heat by going away into exile across the border into neighboring Senegal. He suffered harassment and humiliation in the hands of the French authorities.
When he went to Senegal thinking that he would have safe haven in Rufisque, all the colonial government had to do here was to talk to the French government in Senegal, and they too started to harass Small in Senegal. And the good thing about going to Senegal for Small was that being away from union activities in Bathurst, he felt, what other way can we reach? Could he reach his constituents? And then he thought, well, the best way to reach my constituents is to start a newspaper. And that's how he launched the Gambia Outlook and Senegambia Reporter in 1922 in Rufisque. So even though being away in exile, he decided he would keep in touch with his union roots. And that newspaper started coming in.
Edward Francis Small was a veteran journalist who used his newspaper, the Gambia Outlook, to expose the injustices and double standards perpetrated on Gambians by the colonial government.
He edited one of the first nationalist newspapers in this country, which sought to do nothing but to, sensitize the population on their God-given rights. He supported the rights of the poor and the downtrodden people. This he did, through the petition. Small will use, his penmanship and his knowledge of the workings of the colonial administration, to write, their grievances and direct it towards, the right channels. Sometimes to the colonial secretary, like in Bathurst, sometimes to the governor himself in Bathurst, and sometimes to the Secretary of State for Colonies in London, and sometimes even to the King of England. This he did on many, many occasions. For example, Chief Omar Sise of Njau, who was unfairly dismissed by the colonial authorities. He went to Small, and Small wrote a successful petition, which led, to his reinstatement as chief.
He devoted his life to change the unfair colonial laws and hoped to see that justice prevailed. The colonial regime, however, used every means at its disposal, from trickery and denouncement to sabotage and covert surveillance by New Scotland Yard, to ensure that the seed of self-determination was crushed and that the British imperial order prevailed.
This was a trend that was on and on in all the colonial, in all the colonies. People who challenge them, people who disagree with them, they monitor them. They talked negatively about so many of our people. But again, it was what was going on. It was the trend of the times. So people who they would even discuss, and they monitored him, as you said. And even when Liberia wanted him as a consul, they talked negatively about him. They were not very happy about him. And sometimes it's very interesting about some of the things that the Europeans write about our people. It was not only Edward Francis Small, but even those other Gambians who resisted him, like our famous Fodikaba, Fodisila, and all these people. They wrote negatively about them. In fact, they call them rebels. They come to the country, they come and meet us in our country, and when the people resist them in what they want to do, they call them rebel. So sometimes I just wonder, who is the rebel? You have left your country, you have come to our country, you want to take over power, you want to control the people. And so this was the trend.
In 1917, Small formed the Gambia Farmers Cooperative Marketing Association. In addition, he had also founded the Gambia National Defense Union in 1919 and the Bathurst Trade Union. These institutions were to become the framework for the more challenging transformation into a political arena of the strong. committed and unified African voice.
When he founded this union, he took upon himself to fight for their condition of work, salaries, condition of work, etc., etc. And this was from where Small gathered a lot of followers.
By this time, the colonial government had spotted Small, alleged and declared him the stubborn troublemaker. And to stop him, nothing would stand in their way. The bad blood between Small and the Europeans came to a physical showdown in what became known as the Balangar incidents.
He went to Balangar as a church missionary from the Wesleyan Mission. But then when he looked at the unfair trading system that was in Balangar, Balangar was a key trading post. People were cheating at the scales. The farmers could not respond because they were illiterate. They were not schooled enough to know pounds and bushels and whatnot. And Small said, hey, I am a missionary. My missionary work is not just to tell you about Bible. I think my missionary work also asks me to tell you how to work on your own behalf so that you can get a fair returns for your farm produce. So he held evening classes to teach farmers and ordinary village folk their rights. And for doing that, that's what caused the Balangar incident. The traders over there were angry with him. And this particular trader from the United Africa Company, Mr. Walker, in the absence of the commissioner, decided that he would be the spokesman for this system, the government, while the commissioner was out of the jurisdiction. The ordinary tradition of ringing the bell to welcome the new year. I mean, it's done in all these churches. They ring the bell, 1917 turning into 1918. And Walker decided that the ringing of the bell disturbed his peace.
Walker was a Christian. Small was a Christian. And ringing the bell at midnight mass was something, it's a practice for the Christians. So if this man selfishly say, you cannot ring the bell and disturb my sleep, it shows us what type of man he was. Okay, the selfish, the domineering, the person who want to command, want to control. And here, again, we see him making sure that no, you're not going to, it's my right, we're going to do it, it's a tradition, we have to keep up to our tradition. And so, he fought for his rights.
The Balangar incident was just one of the many pretexts to have Small removed. The truth was that Balangar was the center of the oil seeds trade, and the agents of the Bathurst Trading Company, BTC, hated Small for organizing the farmers into cooperatives. Lowly people were being armed with the courage by the power of information to better negotiate their livelihood. The new knowledge that Small was imparting to the farmers on pricing and trading practices angered the traders.
For the peasants to come together and bargain as a collective was much easier for one person to stand up in opposition to these companies, because these companies were very powerful. So this carried on until Small decided to organize them. Things came to a head at some point when the traveling commissioner was very aggrieved by Small's interference. So he wrote to the governor at the time and said, Small is a man who lacks judgment, lacks courtesy, and his removal from this mission station should be done forthwith. This was dispatch that he sent to the colonial governor for the Wesleyan mission to take action so that Small can be removed. So Small was removed from that station.
Small was a man who had devoted his life to raising the political awareness of Gambians. Many would concede the fact that they got to know about Small through the slogan, "No taxation without representation." It was the son of the soil who fought tooth and nail to draw attention to the need for representation in the colonial government. In fact, Small could be described as the vanguard of freedom movement, and he struggled for social justice in the Gambia. After 1917, while communism was gaining ground in Middle Europe, trade unions became perceived as a cancer for the British Empire. So when Small was described as linked subversive, meaning he was a communist sympathizer, the hero's name and reputation suffered great damage.
When the idea of the National Congress of British West Africa came up, Small quit his job and went to Accra for the meeting. And there they formed this very dynamic group asking for the building of universities, the establishment of colleges, and what could be more progressive than that? But the colonial government saw the GFCMA as a quote-unquote as a hostile organization. And Governor Armitage did not like the organization, so he tried to suppress it. That was the suppressive move he was busy doing when Small had to go to Senegal in exile, away from his unions, because they thought he was unionizing. Certainly one colonial secretary by the name of CRM Walkman in 1930 was completely convinced that Small was a communist, and he branded him so.
The colonial mentality is simply this: wherever there is land, it has to be either mined or used for plantation. And regardless of whether these lands are the lands that come under customary tenureship or not, so they pegged their boundaries wherever they wanted based on the pencil and ruler lines that they had drawn. Small said no, he's going to stand up and fight it and defend this country. So this was the man that formed alliances, started a trade union movement, because he also knew that it was important to organize people in trade unions, and also for the unions to have secret ballots. Because you see, he has learned from Britain their tactics, but he's using the very same tactics to defeat them.
In 1947, Small was forced to reshuffle his constituents into a group of loyal folks he called the Gambian National League, in order to make a decent showing in the elections for the Legislative Council. He was elected, becoming the first ever Gambian citizen to have been so duly endorsed into office at the ballot box.
He was nominated to the House of Representatives, to the legislature. In fact, he was not nominated to the legislature. He was elected by the people. In those days, it was only taxpayers or yard owners who had the right to vote. Then you can imagine Banjul, in those days battles was so small. It didn't include, in fact, the protectorate. Later on, it was added to the protectorate, extended to the protectorate. But for battles, roughly 600 to 700 yard owners and so on would vote, and he was the first to be voted in.
Small is indeed the father of Gambian nationalism, because really he was the first Gambian to start the slogan, taxation bought with representation. And this he did through his newspaper, through the National Council of British West Africa. And even the very idea of having representation, elected representation, started with Small.
From 1919 to 1950, Small strove relentlessly to unify religious and ethnic-based associations of tradesmen and artisans under an altruistic and national common cause, but the colonial government would not relent in its strive to destroy Small and his activities by infiltrating into the very fabric that held his unions together.
Since the 20s, up to the 30s, up to the 40s, the elective principle was rejected by the colonialists. So it was through constant struggle that a concession was made. Small was really, little known is known about it, but he was the one who created the basis for all that. And this is what eventually led to all these political parties, the PPP, the United Party, etc., because the work was already done.
Political cohesion continued to crack along the religious divide that first raised its ugly head in the mid-40s among the youth. The phenomenon almost derailed his life's mission when a consolidated political party, the Gambian Muslim Congress, appeared in 1952 to appeal to the parochial specificities that the name suggested. The party's founding by a former apprentice and protégé of his inflicted Small with a deep sense of defeat and was the blow that began the psychological decline of the fighter.
Small had some very good supporters and local following. Among these supporters were Sir Samuel Foster, who was a big merchant, as well as other friends, most notably Gandhi Randall, Downs Thomas, Koto Richards, and Mr. Jahumpa. Now, in 1935, Mr. Jahumpa's father, a Muslim, came to Mr. Small and said, "I want you to take this man under your wing and show him the way of this world." That was how Mr. Jahumpa became Mr. Small's protege. One thing, though, the colonial establishment succeeded in doing. They succeeded in isolating him from his people, and very sadly, he lost Mr. Jahumpa, and Mr. Jahumpa went out and set up his own amalgamated trade union congress, whilst Mr. Sassam Foster organized another organization to counter Small.
Critics of Small would claim that Small has not succeeded because he died without dignity, friends and followers. They even go further to question his ability to start a political party in the Gambia. However, what these critics have failed to realize is that Small's work is to ensure that justice prevails and that Gambians are allowed to run their own affairs. It was undoubtedly through his efforts and mounting pressures that gave rise to the withdrawal of the colonial government, thus giving opportunity for the rise of political parties.
He was the mentor, of many of the nationalist leaders. Like I am Gabe Jahumpa, for example. Like Mr. St. Clair Juve, who were, to become, very, very noted nationalist leaders. They passed through, the tutelage of, Small. Small also championed the ideas of workers' rights. We culminated in the 1929 strike, the first successful anti-colonial strike in British, colonies. Not only in Africa, but in the entire British colonies. Now, what this, did, it was to also, reveal, the power of the workers, in the anti-colonial fight. And another way in which, Small can be called the father of Gambian nationalism is also his championing, of the elective principle, in the Legislative Council. We started in 1947, with a new constitution. And then in 1951, there's another constitution which for the first time allowed, political parties, and they were formed. And then continued in the, to 1954 constitution, which, for the first time provided for the position of speaker, and also for the positions, of ministers, Gambian ministers, like in executive council.
When Small retired at old age, the nation he fought to emancipate from the mentality of subjugation lived on. Ignorant of the contributions of such a patriot who spent all his 67 years correcting the anomalies of the colonial relationships and calling for a liberation of the African mind so that Gambians would assume the architecture of their own history and become the deciders of their own destinies.
In only 67 years, he had lived selflessly, and of course he died penniless, and he died without friends because people were afraid to be associated with him, lest the wrath of the government descends upon them.
Take me, I am feeling lonely. Take me to the lovers' road, but don't let me mama know.
Many decades after his demise, Small remained uncelebrated until the Banjul City Council gave him modest recognition by naming a back street after him. However, in March 2013, the President of the Second Republic, His Excellency Sheikh Professor Dr. Alhaji Yahya A.J.J. Jammeh Babili Mansur, declared a change of name for the country's main referral hospital, the Royal Victoria Teaching Hospital, to the Edward Francis Small Teaching Hospital.
Edward Francis Small was more than a hero. Small lifted the veil of ignorance, the yoke of servitude, and the stigma of inferiority in the soul and spirit of the African. He fought for truth, justice and equity, freedom and ordered liberty. May the sons and daughters of the Gambia emulate your patriotic spirit in rendering selfless service to their country. Rest in perfect peace. Honorable Edward Francis Small, the voice of conscience.